Are you actually asking me to dinner, Mr. Caldwell, or are they laughing at me? Hannah Miller's question erased every smile in the conference room. 10 seconds earlier, Caldwell Capital's senior executives had been joking about who Ethan Caldwell should bring to the private investor dinner at the Langford Hotel the following evening. Ethan, 35, Billionaire founder and chief executive officer, had spent the last hour negotiating projections, acquisition targets, and a deal important enough to keep 12 people in the room past 7 o'clock. Hannah had stood near the door with her navy notebook against her chest, waiting to confirm his schedule. At 28, she had worked beside Ethan for 4 years. She wore black-framed glasses, a gray cardigan over a white blouse, sensible flats, and her chestnut hair pulled into the same practical knot she wore most weekdays. Nobody asked what she thought about the acquisition. They asked her for coffee, calendars, documents, and reminders. Then one executive glanced at Ethan and joked, "Take Hannah tomorrow. She probably organizes dinner better than she attends one." Someone laughed. Another man added, "Just warn her there is no spreadsheet for choosing dessert." More laughter. Hannah heard every word. Ethan should have ended it there. Instead, tired and careless, he looked toward her and said, "Hannah, dinner tomorrow. 7:30. Consider yourself my date." The room erupted again. Hannah did not smile. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at the man whose meetings she had rescued, whose forgotten calls she remembered, and whose schedule she could reconstruct from memory faster than most people could open a calendar. "Are you actually asking me to dinner, Mr. Caldwell?" she said. "Or are they laughing at me?" Silence. Ethan's expression changed. For the first time, he seemed to hear his own words from her side of the room. "Hannah, I did not mean. It is a simple question." Madison Blake, the company's polished public relations vice president, lowered her eyes toward the table, hiding the trace of a smile. Ethan glanced around at the executives who suddenly found their documents fascinating. He could withdraw the invitation. He could call it a joke and make everything worse. Or he could answer her. "I am asking," he said. Hannah studied him for a moment. "Then I accept." She opened her notebook. "The Langford dinner begins at 7:30. Your car is scheduled for 6:45. Mr. Langford prefers sparkling water, not wine, and his legal counsel requested the revised retention figures before noon tomorrow." Ethan blinked. "You remembered all that?" Hannah's expression remained composed. "That is my job." She closed the notebook and walked toward the door. One executive cleared his throat. "Well, this should be interesting." Hannah stopped without turning around. "I imagine it will be." Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan stared at the empty space where she had been standing. He had known Hannah for 4 years, yet he suddenly realized he could not remember the last time he had asked what she did after leaving the office, what she cared about, or whether she even liked the restaurants he routinely instructed her to reserve. Across the table, Madison gave a small laugh. "You know she is going to take this seriously." Ethan looked toward the closed door. Something about that sentence bothered him more than it should have. "Maybe I should too," he said. Outside the conference room, Hannah pressed the elevator button and finally allowed herself one slow breath. The polished steel doors reflected the woman everyone upstairs thought they understood. Quiet secretary, thick glasses, plain cardigan, navy notebook. Hannah looked at her reflection until the elevator arrived. Tomorrow night, she decided, she would not become someone else for Ethan Caldwell or anyone in that room. She would simply give them the uncomfortable opportunity to discover how little they had ever bothered to see. Hannah stayed at Caldwell Capital until nearly 9 that night, long after most of the executive floor had emptied and the Chicago skyline had turned into a grid of white and gold beyond the windows. She sat at her desk beneath the soft glow of a reading lamp, finishing the revised retention report Victor Langford's legal counsel had requested. Through the glass wall of the conference room, abandoned coffee cups and neatly stacked folders remained from the meeting. The laughter remained too. She could still hear it in her mind. Spreadsheet for dessert. This should be interesting. Hannah had heard variations of those jokes for years. She was the woman who remembered passwords people forgot, corrected presentation errors 5 minutes before meetings, and knew which investor needed an aisle seat without checking a file. Reliable Hannah. Organized Hannah. Nerdy Hannah. Apparently, nobody had wondered whether there was more. She opened her navy notebook and flipped through pages filled with compact handwriting. Victor Langford, concerned about employee turnover after acquisitions. Daniel Ruiz, daughter graduating in May. Linda Chun, never schedule after 6 on Thursdays. Ethan Caldwell, skips lunch before major negotiations, becomes impatient after third coffee. Hannah paused at that last line and almost smiled. For years of details lived inside those pages, not because anyone had ordered her to remember them, but because she understood something many executives did not. Business was made of people before it was made of numbers. Her phone lit up with a message from an office group chat she rarely joined. Someone had written, "Any bets on which cardigan makes the big debut tomorrow?" Hannah stared at the screen, then quietly turned it face down. That hurt more than the joke itself. After 4 years, they still believed the cardigan was the most interesting thing about her. At 9:15, Hannah shut down her computer, slipped the notebook into her bag, and took the train north to her one-bedroom apartment. The place was small but warm, filled with books, framed photographs, financial journals, and an upright piano she had bought secondhand after saving for nearly a year. She kicked off her flats, made tea, and opened her closet. Gray, navy, black, practical clothes chosen for 12-hour office days. Then, behind a winter coat, she found an emerald green dress she had purchased for her cousin's wedding the previous spring. Elegant, simple, completely hers. Hannah held it against herself and looked into the mirror. She did not remove her glasses. She did not loosen her hair and suddenly discover a different woman hiding underneath. That was not the point. The woman in the cardigan and the woman holding the emerald dress had always been the same person. The problem was that Caldwell Capital had decided which version deserved to be noticed. Hannah placed the dress carefully over a chair, then returned to the kitchen table with her notebook. Tomorrow was not merely dinner. Victor Langford would be there, along with his advisors and Caldwell Capital's senior leadership. Ethan believed he had invited his secretary. Hannah intended to arrive as exactly that, because there was nothing shameful about the title. But if anyone expected her to sit quietly while executives discussed a transaction she had spent 6 weeks helping prepare, they were going to be disappointed. She turned to a clean page and wrote 3 words across the top: Langford retention concerns. Then she began reviewing every detail. Across downtown Chicago, Ethan was still in his office when he noticed the revised report sitting in his inbox. No errors. No missing figures. Sent at 8:57. He glanced through the glass toward Hannah's empty desk and remembered her question from the conference room. For the first time, he wondered how many evenings she had stayed late fixing problems he never even knew existed. Meanwhile, Hannah closed her notebook shortly before midnight. The emerald dress waited beside her. Her black-framed glasses rested on top of the book she was reading. She looked at both and smiled faintly. Tomorrow, she would not prove that the quiet secretary could become someone worth seeing. She would prove that she had been worth seeing all along. At 7:28 the next evening, Ethan Caldwell stood beneath the marble arches of the Langford Hotel lobby, checking his watch for the 3rd time. Victor Langford and his advisors were already upstairs in the private dining room, while 2 Caldwell Capital executives lingered near the bar, discussing the acquisition. Madison Blake stood beside them in a black evening dress, watching the entrance with thinly disguised amusement. "Maybe Hannah changed her mind," she said. Ethan slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. "She said she would come. Hannah also thinks arriving 10 minutes early counts as being on time." One executive laughed. "I still want to know whether she brought the cardigan." Ethan did not laugh this time. Enough. The word was quiet, but the conversation stopped. A soft chime sounded across the lobby. The elevator doors opened. Ethan turned, and for one unexpected second, he forgot what he had been about to say. Hannah stepped out wearing an elegant emerald green dress that fell just below her knees, simple black heels, and the same black-framed glasses she wore every day at Caldwell Capital. Her chestnut hair, usually pinned into a practical knot, rested naturally around her shoulders. There was no dramatic jewelry, no attempt to imitate the wealthy women moving through the hotel, and nothing about her expression asked for approval. She carried a small black handbag in one hand, and her familiar navy notebook in the other. Ethan stared a moment too long. Hannah stopped in front of him. "Mr. Caldwell?" He blinked. "Hannah." One corner of her mouth lifted. "You invited me." Behind him, the executive who had joked about her cardigan suddenly became very interested in his drink. Madison's smile disappeared for half a second before returning. "Well," she said, looking Hannah over, "this is unexpected." Hannah met her eyes. Why? Madison had no immediate answer. Ethan cleared his throat. You look, he stopped himself. Beautiful was true, but somehow it felt inadequate, as though reducing this moment to her appearance would repeat the mistake he had already made. You look ready for dinner. Hannah glanced at his watch, and with 2 minutes to spare. That made him smile. I thought you believed 10 minutes early was on time. For work. Tonight you invited me as your date, remember? The reminder landed with enough weight to erase his smile. I remember. Good. They entered the elevator together. As the doors closed, Ethan noticed the notebook. You brought that. Victor Langford requested revised retention figures. This is dinner, Hannah. With an investor considering a major acquisition. She adjusted her glasses. That makes it dinner with footnotes. Ethan laughed before he could stop himself. It was the first time Hannah had ever heard that particular laugh from him. Unguarded and surprisingly warm. She looked toward the glowing floor numbers rather than letting him see that she noticed. When the elevator opened upstairs, Victor Langford was standing near the private dining room, speaking with his legal counsel. Ethan approached first. Victor, good evening. Victor shook his hand, then looked toward Hannah. Ethan began. This is my secretary, Hannah Miller. Hannah extended her hand. Executive Secretary. It is nice to finally meet you, Mr. Langford. I hope your flight from Boston was smoother than the one in February. Victor paused. You remember that? You lost 6 hours in Detroit and still made the morning meeting. Victor smiled. I certainly remember it. As they walked toward the dining room, Ethan looked at Hannah differently. The emerald dress had caught his attention in the lobby, but within 30 seconds, she had done something more important. She had made Victor feel remembered. At the table, Hannah took the seat beside Ethan and placed her navy notebook near her water glass. Across from them sat executives who had spent years walking past her desk without asking what she knew. Tonight, for the first time, they were going to find out. By the time the main course arrived, Hannah had spoken less than anyone at the table, but she had noticed everything. Victor Langford barely touched the projections placed beside his plate. His legal counsel kept returning to the employee retention appendix. Ethan was focused on purchase price, while Robert Hayes, Caldwell Capital's senior vice president of acquisitions, was confidently explaining how quickly the target company could be integrated. We expect retention to remain above 90% through the first year, Robert said. Victor set down his water glass. That is not what your revised report says. Robert hesitated. The variance is minimal. Hannah's fingers rested beside her navy notebook. She knew the number. More importantly, she knew why it mattered. Victor leaned forward. Your report projects 83% after 12 months if the regional management structure is consolidated immediately. Which number am I supposed to believe? Robert glanced toward Ethan. 90% reflects our adjusted assumptions. Based on what? Silence settled over the table. Ethan looked at the documents, then at Robert. What changed? Robert turned a page that did not contain the answer. Hannah could have remained quiet. She was there because of a careless invitation, not because anyone had asked for her judgment. Then Ethan looked beside him. Hannah. Every face turned toward her. She opened the notebook. The 90% estimate assumes regional managers remain in place for at least 6 months after closing. The 83% estimate assumes immediate consolidation. Victor studied her. And which approach does Caldwell recommend? Hannah paused. That is not my decision. I did not ask whose decision it was. I asked which approach makes sense. Across the table, Madison watched carefully. Hannah adjusted her glasses. If retention matters, 6 months. Robert shifted in his chair. That delays efficiency savings. Yes, Hannah said calmly. But replacing experienced managers also has a cost. The target company lost 11% of its staff after its last restructuring, and most departures happened in departments where local supervisors were removed first. Victor's legal counsel looked down at the report. Where is that? Appendix C, page 42. Pages turned. The figure was there. Victor looked back at Hannah. You memorized a 42-page appendix? No. I remembered the part that answered your question. Ethan almost smiled. Victor did. What exactly do you do at Caldwell Capital, Miss Miller? Executive Administration. Victor glanced at Ethan. You keep your smartest people in interesting places. A few restrained smiles appeared around the table. Hannah did not celebrate. She simply closed the notebook. But Ethan felt the remark differently. For 4 years, He had thought of Hannah as the person who protected his calendar from chaos. Tonight, she had protected a multi-million-dollar conversation from an answer his own senior vice president could not support. Dinner continued, but the balance had changed. Victor began directing questions toward Hannah as often as he directed them toward Ethan. She explained which department heads had raised concerns, remembered a client conversation from 6 weeks earlier, and pointed out that Victor's real concern was not quarterly margin. "You are worried about what happens to the people after the acquisition," she said. Victor leaned back. "Exactly." Ethan watched him relax for the first time all evening. Hannah had done what spreadsheets, projections, and polished presentations had failed to do. She had listened. When dessert arrived, Victor looked toward Ethan. "I came here expecting another argument about price. Instead, your secretary reminded me why I considered this deal in the first place." "Executive secretary," Ethan corrected quietly. Hannah turned toward him. Their eyes met for a second. It was small, but she noticed. Then a familiar voice came from behind them. "Well, this looks serious." Madison had returned from taking a call near the bar. She stopped beside Victor's chair and smiled toward Hannah. "I hope nobody has forgotten how our unexpected guest ended up here tonight." Hannah's expression changed. Ethan immediately understood what Madison was about to do, and for the first time that evening, knowing the right answer was not going to save him. Madison's smile remained pleasant enough for anyone who had missed the conference room the night before. "Victor, you should probably know this was not exactly a traditional invitation." Hannah slowly set down her water glass. Ethan's shoulders tightened. "Madison." "What?" Madison asked lightly. "We are all adults here." Victor looked between them. "I am missing something." Madison turned toward Hannah. "Yesterday, some of the executives were joking that Ethan needed a date for tonight. Someone suggested Hannah." The table went quiet. Robert stared at his plate. Madison continued. "It was an office joke. Nothing serious." Ethan played along, and apparently Hannah decided to surprise everyone. The compliment hidden inside the insult made Hannah's face grow still. She looked at Ethan. "Not Madison. Ethan, tell him she is wrong." For words. No anger. No raised voice. Ethan could have softened the truth. He could have said the invitation became sincere. He could have reminded everyone that Hannah had just helped save the most difficult conversation of the evening. None of that would change how it began. "She is not wrong," he said. Hannah blinked once. Ethan leaned toward her. "But that is not what tonight became. That was not my question. Hannah, I made a stupid decision. You made it in front of a room full of people." Madison shifted slightly, perhaps realizing the moment was no longer entertaining. Ethan lowered his voice. "I am sorry." Hannah looked around the table. Less than 5 minutes earlier, Victor had been asking for her opinion. Now every person seemed to be waiting to see whether the billionaire's secretary would embarrass herself. She refused to give them that. Hannah removed the small guest badge the hotel had provided for Caldwell Capital's dinner and placed it beside her untouched dessert. Her black-framed glasses stayed exactly where they had always been. "Mr. Langford, it was a pleasure meeting you." Victor's expression softened. "Likewise, Miss Miller." She turned to his legal counsel. "The updated retention files will be in your inbox by 9 tomorrow morning." Then she looked at Ethan. "I think the joke has lasted long enough." Hannah picked up her navy notebook and handbag and walked away from the table. Ethan stood immediately. "Excuse me." He followed her through the restaurant and reached the elevator lobby just as she pressed the button. "Hannah, wait." She turned. "For what?" "Let me explain." "You already did." "No. Madison told you how it started. She did not tell you what changed." Hannah's expression finally cracked, not into tears, but disappointment. "You noticed me tonight because everyone else did." Ethan stopped. "That is not fair. Is it not?" She held the notebook against her chest. "I have worked 10 feet from your office for 4 years. Yesterday, your executives laughed at the idea of taking me to dinner, and you joined them. Tonight, I put on a green dress, and suddenly you are looking at me like you discovered someone new. It is not the dress. Then why did it take the dress to make you curious?" Ethan had no answer fast enough. The elevator doors opened behind her. Hannah stepped inside. Ethan remained in the lobby. "I should have stopped them yesterday," he said. "Yes. And I should never have made that invitation a joke." "Yes." He looked at her. "But what you did at that table had nothing to do with me." Hannah's hand rested near the elevator controls. "That is the first thing you have said tonight that I believe." The doors began to close. Ethan took one step forward but stopped himself. Hannah. She met his eyes through the narrowing space. Good night, Mr. Caldwell. The doors closed. Ethan stood alone beneath the hotel lights while the meaning of her words settled over him. Upstairs, a multi-million-dollar negotiation was waiting. For once, Ethan Caldwell was not thinking about the deal. He was thinking about 4 years of mornings, meetings, forgotten lunches, corrected documents, remembered names, and quiet acts of competence he had accepted without ever asking who was doing the work. Hannah had not transformed tonight. She had simply stepped outside the place he had assigned her, and Ethan was beginning to understand how much of her he had failed to see. At 8:12 the next morning, Ethan stepped onto the executive floor expecting to see Hannah behind her desk. Instead, her chair was empty. The monitor was dark. Her coffee mug was gone, and the small plant beside her phone had disappeared. For 4 years, Hannah had arrived before him so consistently that Ethan had never considered what the office would feel like without her. "Where is Miss Miller?" he asked the receptionist. "Human Resources, Mr. Caldwell." She requested a temporary transfer this morning. Ethan looked at the empty desk again. A single navy notebook remained beside the keyboard. He recognized it immediately. Hannah carried it everywhere. He reached for it, then stopped. It was not his. A yellow note attached to the cover read, "Company Scheduling Records. Updated through Friday." Ethan opened only the section marked for executive operations. The first page contained meetings, names, and reminders in Hannah's compact handwriting. Then he began noticing details that had nothing to do with calendars. Daniel Ruiz returning Monday after surgery. Asked how recovery went. Linda Chin cannot stay past 6 on Thursdays. She takes her mother to physical therapy. Victor Langford cares more about employee retention than short-term margin. Do not lead with savings. Ethan turned another page. Send flowers to reception team after quarterly reporting week. Robert's son has a school recital Wednesday. Move late meeting if possible. Then he found his own name. Ethan Caldwell. Eat before afternoon negotiations. Third coffee means he skipped lunch again. Call his mother on October 12th. He always forgets when traveling. Ethan stared at the sentence. Hannah had spent years remembering the human details everyone else treated as interruptions. He had called that organization. It was more than that. She had quietly kept people from being reduced to appointments. Mr. Caldwell? Robert Hayes stood several feet away. Langford's counsel called. They want Hannah included in the follow-up discussion. Ethan closed the notebook. Then include her. Robert hesitated. She is transferring out of executive administration. That does not erase what she knows. Ethan handed him the meeting file. And Robert, yesterday you joked about her before dinner. Robert looked uncomfortable. We were only having fun. Was she? Robert said nothing. Ethan glanced toward the empty desk. Then it was not harmless. At 10:30, Hannah returned from Human Resources wearing her usual white blouse, gray cardigan, black framed glasses, and practical flats. No emerald dress. No hotel lights. No audience. Ethan saw her immediately. Hannah. She stopped but maintained several feet between them. Mr. Caldwell. I heard about the transfer. I requested it. Because of last night. Because I need to work somewhere my job is not treated like a punchline. Ethan absorbed that without defending himself. You are right. Hannah seemed almost surprised by how quickly he said it. I owe you an apology without an explanation attached to it. What happened was disrespectful. I participated. I am sorry. Her expression softened slightly, but not enough to become forgiveness. Thank you. Ethan gestured toward the notebook. I opened the company scheduling section because it was marked for executive records. I saw your notes. Hannah's eyes narrowed. Only the work section? Only the work section. He paused. You have been doing more than managing my calendar. I have been doing my job. No. I think I made that phrase smaller than it deserved to be. For the first time, Hannah had no immediate reply. Ethan looked toward the glass offices surrounding them. Langford asked for you in the follow-up meeting. I can provide my notes. He asked for you, not your notes. Hannah studied him carefully. Are you asking because Victor wants me there? Ethan remembered the conference room, the laughter, and the question that had started all of this. I am asking because you understand part of this deal better than people with larger titles. Hannah held his gaze. That sounds different coming from you today. I am trying to be different today. She picked up the Navy notebook. Trying is a start. Then she walked toward Human Resources to finish her transfer paperwork. Ethan watched her leave without stopping her. For once, He understood that respecting Hannah did not mean finding the right words to make her stay. It meant accepting that she had every right to walk away. By lunchtime, the story had already changed shape. Hannah learned that when a co-worker she barely knew stopped beside her temporary desk on the 21st floor and said, "I heard the dinner went pretty well for you." The smile attached to the sentence made her uneasy. "The investor meeting went well," Hannah replied. "That is what I meant." It clearly was not. An hour later, another employee asked whether she would be moving into a larger office now that she had Ethan's attention. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. By 3 o'clock, she understood the rumor moving through Caldwell Capital. The quiet secretary had dressed up, charmed the billionaire chief executive officer, impressed an investor, and was now using the situation to advance her career. The truth had been flattened into gossip. Hannah closed her Navy notebook and walked directly to Human Resources. "I want my transfer request documented," she told the director. "And I want to file a formal workplace conduct complaint regarding what happened before and during the Langford dinner." The director nodded. "Against Madison Blake?" Hannah paused. "Against the conduct, including Mr. Caldwell's part in it." 20 minutes later, Ethan received notice that an independent review would begin. His general counsel suggested he stay out of it. Ethan agreed immediately. "I will provide whatever they request, but I will not participate in deciding the outcome." Madison appeared in his office before the hour ended. "You are really allowing Human Resources to investigate this?" "I am requiring them to handle it independently." "Over a joke?" Ethan looked at her. "That is what Robert called it too." Madison folded her arms. "Hannah is turning one dinner into a career opportunity." "No," Ethan said. "People here are doing that for her." Madison's expression hardened. "You cannot seriously believe she had no idea what she was doing in that dress." Ethan stood, not angrily, but with unmistakable finality. "Her dress is irrelevant. Her work is not." Madison left without answering. Over the next 2 weeks, the review expanded beyond one evening. Human Resources interviewed employees from executive administration, communications, finance, and investor relations. Emails were examined. Group messages were reviewed. A pattern emerged. Madison had repeatedly encouraged dismissive gossip about employees she considered socially awkward or professionally inconvenient. Hannah was not the first person reduced to a joke. She was simply the first who formally challenged it. Meanwhile, a separate review of Hannah's employment record revealed something Ethan should have noticed years earlier. She had identified scheduling conflicts that prevented failed client meetings, caught discrepancies in acquisition materials, documented investor concerns senior managers had overlooked, and created an executive follow-up system now used across 3 departments. None of those achievements had come from an emerald dress. One Friday afternoon, the Human Resources director met with Hannah. "The review found your complaint substantiated. Corrective action will be handled under company policy. Your transfer will not affect your standing, compensation, or advancement opportunities." Hannah exhaled slowly. "Thank you. There is something else. Strategic Operations has been reviewing your work history. They want to discuss your experience." Hannah blinked. "Did Mr. Caldwell arrange that?" "No. In fact, he formally removed himself from any employment decisions involving you while this review was active." Across the building, Ethan received the same report. He read it alone and felt no satisfaction. Being proven wrong about Hannah was not a victory. It was evidence of how long he had failed to see what had been directly in front of him. That evening, Hannah passed the executive floor on her way to the elevator. Ethan was standing near her old desk, but he did not approach. Their eyes met across the quiet office. He gave her a small nod. No explanation. No request. No attempt to turn accountability into romance. Hannah returned the nod and continued walking. Then Ethan looked through the conference room glass at the table where the joke had begun. The investigation could correct a workplace failure, but it could not erase his part in creating it. If he wanted Caldwell Capital to understand what had happened, he would have to do something far more uncomfortable than apologize privately. He would have to tell the truth where everyone could hear it. The following Monday, every senior manager at Caldwell Capital received an unexpected addition to the quarterly leadership meeting. Ethan Caldwell had requested 10 minutes at the beginning, with no presentation and no prepared remarks distributed in advance. Hannah sat near the far end of the conference table, her Navy notebook open beside her and her black-framed glasses resting exactly where they always had. She was there because strategic operations had invited her to observe the meeting as part of her temporary assignment. She did not know what Ethan intended to say. At 9 o'clock, he stood. The room quieted immediately. Before we discuss quarterly performance, I need to address something that happened in this room several weeks ago. Hannah looked up. Ethan did not look away from the executives around him. Some people made a joke about Hannah Miller attending an investor dinner. I had the authority to stop it. Instead, I participated. Robert lowered his eyes. Several others became completely still. Ethan continued. The investigation has been handled independently, and I will not discuss confidential findings. But my own conduct does not require an investigation for me to understand it. He paused. Hannah Miller was not the joke. My judgment was. Hannah felt her fingers tighten around her pen. There was no excuse attached. No mention of exhaustion. No attempt to blame Madison or the people who had laughed first. We talk constantly about leadership in this company, Ethan said. Leadership means very little if people with titles are allowed to decide whose dignity matters. I failed that standard. He sat down. That was all. No applause followed, and Hannah was grateful for it. Accountability did not need applause. 3 days later, Caldwell Capital announced an opening for Director of Strategic Operations. Hannah read the posting twice before closing it. Her first instinct was suspicion. Then the Human Resources Director called. This position was approved during last year's restructuring plan. It was scheduled to open this quarter regardless of recent events. Is Mr. Caldwell involved in hiring? Hannah asked. No. He has formally recused himself. Hannah applied that afternoon. Over the next month, she completed 3 interviews, a case analysis, and a presentation before an independent panel of executives from offices in Chicago, Boston, and Dallas. There were 6 finalists. Nobody asked what she wore to dinner with Ethan Caldwell. They asked how she would reduce executive bottlenecks, preserve institutional knowledge during acquisitions, and improve communication between leadership and regional teams. Hannah answered with 4 years of experience people had once mistaken for administrative routine. When the decision came, she was sitting alone at her temporary desk. We would like to offer you the position. Hannah removed her glasses, pressed 2 fingers briefly against her eyes, then smiled. I accept. On her first morning as Director of Strategic Operations, she stepped onto the executive floor carrying the same Navy notebook. Her office now had glass walls, a view of the Chicago River, and her name beside the door. Robert stopped to congratulate her. Others followed. Ethan remained inside his office until the crowd disappeared. Only then did he walk over. He stopped at her doorway. Director Miller. Hannah looked up. Mr. Caldwell. Congratulations. Thank you. For the record, I did not know until the decision was final. I know. He nodded toward the notebook. Still using that thing? Hannah smiled faintly. Some systems work. Ethan returned the smile, but he did not linger. Have a good first day? As he turned away, Hannah called his name. Ethan. It was the first time she had used it at work. He stopped. What you said in the leadership meeting mattered. His expression softened. It should have been said much sooner. Yes, Hannah replied. But you said it. Ethan nodded once and walked back toward his office. Hannah watched him go, then opened her notebook to a fresh page. She had earned a new title without his intervention, and he had finally learned that respecting her meant stepping away from decisions that belonged to her. For the first time since that careless dinner invitation, they were no longer moving toward each other as billionaire and secretary. They were simply 2 people beginning, carefully, to meet on equal ground. 6 months later, Hannah no longer measured her days by Ethan Caldwell's calendar. As Director of Strategic Operations, she led meetings of her own, traveled twice to Boston for integration planning, and helped build the employee retention program that Victor Langford had insisted should become part of the acquisition agreement. Her Navy notebook still traveled everywhere with her. So did the black-framed glasses. Some things, Hannah had decided, never needed changing. On a cold Thursday evening in Chicago, she finished reviewing a regional operations report and looked through the glass wall of her office. Most of the executive floor had emptied. Snow drifted beyond the windows, softening the lights along the Chicago River. Hannah closed her laptop at 7:15. A quiet knock came from her doorway. Ethan stood there in a dark overcoat, one hand in his pocket and the other holding a small cream reservation card. Do you have a minute? He asked. Hannah leaned back in her chair. That depends. Is strategic operations in trouble? Not tonight. Then come in. Ethan stepped inside, but remained on the other side of her desk. Their relationship had changed slowly over the past 6 months. They had shared meetings, disagreed over budgets, laughed over bad conference room coffee, and learned how to speak without the old hierarchy sitting between every sentence. Ethan never mentioned the dinner again. More importantly, he never used his position to force closeness she had not chosen. Hannah had noticed that too. He placed the reservation card on her desk. Dinner tomorrow, 7:30. Hannah looked at the card, then at him. The restaurant was small, independent, and nowhere near the places Caldwell Capital used for investor meetings. Is Victor Langford coming? No, Robert. Absolutely not. Hannah fought a smile. Madison. Ethan gave her a look. Definitely not. She picked up the card. Then what exactly is this? For the first time since she had known him, the billionaire who could negotiate acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars looked genuinely nervous about asking one woman a simple question. A date, he said. Hannah became still. Ethan continued before she could answer. No investors. No executives. No audience. No joke. Hannah studied his face. Are you asking me, Ethan, or is somebody laughing? The question returned them both to the conference room 6 months earlier. This time, Ethan did not hesitate. I am asking, and nobody else gets a vote. Hannah looked down at her Navy notebook. For years earlier, she had begun filling those pages because remembering details was part of her job. Somewhere along the way, she had recorded pieces of Ethan too, the skipped lunches, the forgotten family calls, the third cup of coffee before difficult negotiations. Back then, she had known everything required to keep his life organized while he barely knew anything about hers. Now he knew she played piano badly when she was tired. He knew she preferred neighborhood restaurants to private dining rooms. He knew she hated being interrupted halfway through a book. Most importantly, he had learned that noticing someone was not the same as respecting them. Hannah closed the notebook. Then I accept. Ethan smiled. 7:30? 7:25. He raised an eyebrow. I thought 10 minutes early was on time. That is for work. She stood and reached for her coat. This is personal. Ethan laughed softly. At the doorway, he stopped. Hannah. Yes. For what it is worth, I am glad you wore the green dress that night. She gave him a warning look. Ethan smiled. Not because it changed you. Because it finally made me realize I was the one who needed to change. Hannah considered him for a moment, then slipped on her coat. That might be the smartest thing you have said in 6 months. They walked toward the elevators together. There was no audience waiting, no executive laughter, and no billionaire offering a secretary a place in his world. Hannah had built her own place. Ethan had simply learned how to approach it with respect. As the elevator doors opened, Hannah adjusted the same black-framed glasses she had worn the night everything began and stepped inside beside him. The first invitation had been a joke. The second was a choice. And this time, they were both choosing.